Water security, time and time again, development economics worldwide have emphasized is probably one of the most important components in any development intervention programs. So that the topic of my talk is going to focus on back in early 1970s when the New Village movement, which we call 새마을운동, was being implemented. In what way the government, the top-down approach that was pushed for, as well as the bottom-up participation, that resulted in a really remarkable success in terms of increasing the level of income, as well as improving the living environment and such, so that while the New Village movement was being implemented, what exactly was the water security in the integrated development program? Okay, so that is the focus of my talk, and I will also touch briefly on the typical cost-benefit analysis regarding water security in development intervention programs. And lastly, I will talk about 10 key principles. When you talk about 새마을운동, what key principles should we have in mind to implement the intervention programs? So I will discuss those one by one, and then see if back in early 1970s, when 새마을운동 movement was in full swing, to what extent those principles were being applied. And also, outside of Korea, the 새마을운동 development model is being transferred. A lot of efforts have been made in different parts of the world here and there over the years, and so that those principles of 새마을운동, what can we observe such that we can identify which of the principles can be more easily transferred and such. So that Jeffrey Sachs, a Harvard development economist, has emphasized that when he considered 5 areas that would call for development interventions, in boosting agriculture, yes, irrigation, that's agricultural water security. And safe drinking water and sanitation, another very, very important area, because we know it boosts health benefits, and also it boosts productivity long term, such that it will raise per person income and life expectancy and such. The Asian Water Development Outlook, published in 2013, categorized the national water security in 5 areas. So that 새마을운동, when we look back at what was going on in the early 1970s and beyond, and in different developing countries today, here and there, we can focus on 3 of these 5 areas. 1, household water security, which referring to improving the water supply situation and access to improved sanitation and hygiene, as well as economic water security, focusing mostly on agricultural water security, and resilience to water-related disasters. So when you look back, even today we have a lot of flood problems and sometimes drought problems. Flood during a monsoon season. And back in 1970s, the problem was much, much more serious. So what did you do to improve the situation? Typically, the indicators that we use in measuring the level of household water security, access to piped water supply, access to improved sanitation, and hygiene. Now, these photos will clearly, remind you, if you happen to be a Korean, perhaps in my age group, how those days were. Okay, I remember these days myself, as if it was yesterday. Now, in particular, as we know all very well, in countries like countries located in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly it's young girls and women that are hit the most, when there's a water security problem. And Korean women, young girls also suffered a lot, having to transport water that they were able to get like easily 1.5 or 2 kilometers away from where they lived, spending 2-3 hours easily every day. So that the long hours spent transporting water, it could have been used to do homework, to do schoolwork, or to go to school. Okay, so that the lost time because of lack of water security clearly impacted the level of education. Okay. For women and children in particular. Now, government water policy back in 1970s, it focused mostly on flood control and irrigation development, so that as industrialization and modernization continued on, 60s and 70s and 80s, the water pollution became increasingly more and more serious.
Professor Lee, you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, 새마을운동 started in 1971, and another area that the government focused on is afforestation to help reduce the flood problem. And when we take a look at the 40 standard 새마을운동 projects, here and there, although the categorization scheme is different, we can see that the individual components have a lot to do with flood control, irrigation, and household water security improvement. So that during the 새마을운동 in the 70s, the focus was placed on construction of a sewage system and irrigation, as well as construction of small bridges, upgrading of stream beds, embankment of rivers, afforestation and corrosion control, so that the targeted goals, objectives with water security government policies was to achieve improvements in these areas. Piped water does not necessarily mean tap water. Of course not. Tap water became available to urban households, and when it becomes available, it always comes with monthly water bills. But the beauty of the 새마을운동 was the improved sanitation, access to water. It simply meant that in terms of sanitation and availability, it was easy. It became easier, but then they were not paying any bills at all. Okay, and in terms of sanitation, piped sewer system, there was one focus during the 새마을운동. So from today's perspective, for example, when they were installing these sewage pipes, there wasn't any treatment facilities at all anywhere. Okay, even today in rural areas, treatment facilities are not that common. It's not everywhere today. So we still have a lot of work to do in that regard. And from 1970 to 1980, somehow all the villages were able to achieve 159% of the targeted length, and upgrading of stream beds as well. It was very, very successful, so that it was basically human development. The main focus of 새마을운동, trying to instill in the rural villagers this spirit of what we call 새마을운동, which is spirit of diligence, self-help, and cooperation. Now, what particular water-related village projects contributed to enhancing the spirit of 새마을운동? I tried to think about it. Doing some research on all the available data from 1970s, and I realized although there was efforts to drill, for example, more wells or deeper wells, but then usually it's just a small number of technicians that did the work, so it didn't help much in terms of improving the spirit of 새마을운동, in terms of like enhancing the communal, like a competitive spirit, communal cooperative efforts and such.
Please conclude,
Yes.
Professor.
So that we all know that the benefits of improved water security, the impact it will have on productivity, income, and life expectancy and such. And there has been a lot of cost-benefit analysis so far, and they all point to one thing. The benefit-cost ratios of interventions for improved sanitation and water and sanitation, it's really huge. Each dollar spent, it will generate anywhere between $5 to even $46 in reduced healthcare costs and increased economic productivity. So that household water security, it was the strategy of the government was really right. I mean, it was the villagers who basically determined what particular village project that they're going to undertake, and often they had these water security related projects. Okay. The rural government interventions, a lot of times we see are cost effective, not very viable long term. So sustainability and cost effectiveness, typical two problems. But then if you're going to apply 새마을운동, number one, community initiated proposal, community participation, and then community burden sharing. In Korea, the government's cost sharing was only about 30% of the total rural investment throughout the entire 1970s. And principle of community vision sharing, learning together by doing together. So all these principles, contributed to very active community-wide engagement. Okay, and organizing capacity and leadership were the key drivers underlying these. Okay, because of the limited time given to me, I'm going to have to cut short. But perhaps if there are any questions from the floor at the end of the session, maybe I could entertain some questions. Thank you all very, very much.